Welcome to Part 2 of World War II, History of the 20th and 1340th Engineer Combat Battalions. When we left Part 1, the men of the 20th were training for another invasion. No one knew where it would be. As usual, the average soldier didn't know where he was going until shortly before being ordered to go there. It was understandable. In World War II, there was a slogan, "Loose lips sink ships." The Allies seemed to be pretty good at keeping secrets and tricking the enemy into thinking they were going to attack one place and instead attacking somewhere else, as you saw in the case of Operation Torch and you'll see in the next invasions. There were plenty of rumors going around, though, and the Mediterranean had no shortage of targets. Some soldiers thought they would invade Italy, some thought Greece, some Sicily or Corsica. Actually, the next target had been decided at the Casablanca Conference back in January, 5 months before. As I said, the Allies were pretty good at keeping secrets. Operation Husky. This is a picture of General Eisenhower, Winston Churchill, General George Marshall, and British Field Marshal Montgomery, along with various Allied leaders in Algiers on May 27, 1943, to plan the invasion of Sicily. It's July 5th and Operation Husky has begun. The men board their LCI and move out into Lake Bizerti, along with hundreds of other ships. This is a picture of the actual LCI that Chappie rode to Sicily. The picture was in his book. They will move out of Lake Bizerti into the Mediterranean to join a large convoy. The men are feeling excitement, pride, and apprehension for what comes next. At 4 a.m. on July 6th, German bombers fly over to bomb the convoy, but the Allies have searchlights and anti-aircraft guns all around the lake. The bombers are shot down. On July 7th, to confuse the enemy, the convoy sails south to the port of Sousse, Tunisia. Unfortunately, that night a Scirocco starts. A Scirocco is a hot wind that blows northward from the Sahara Desert. The people in the Mediterranean area are familiar with it. It's extremely hot and dry when it gets to North Africa. Two different accounts say the temperature went up to 125 degrees. On the morning of July 8th, the men make a hot 8-mile hike through the center of Sousse, which has been destroyed by the war. After a swim in the Mediterranean and lunch, the men board the LCI again and receive their final briefing. They're finally told that they're invading Sicily as part of the 7th Army under General Patton. They'll be landing with the 3rd Infantry Division at Licata, Sicily, where their task will be to clear mines on the beach. On the night of July 9th, the convoy rode out a severe storm in the Mediterranean. Almost everyone was seasick. The captain of the LCI was concerned that the high seas would make it difficult to land the men in shallow enough water, approximately 3 feet, so that the men wouldn't drown with heavy packs. Rough water or not, it was too late to turn back. Let's talk a little bit about landing shifts and craft now. This is a picture of an LST, the last functioning LST in existence. This LST number 325 actually participated in the Invasion of Normandy. It's a floating museum maintained and sailed by volunteers. It's docked in Evanston, Indiana on the Ohio River. Sometimes the ship has sailed to other cities on the Ohio River, like Louisville or Cincinnati, so that people from those areas get to see the ship. LSTs are ocean-going ships. This one is 328 feet long. LST is an acronym for Landing Ship Tank. It can carry tanks and other vehicles and troops. LCT stands for Landing Craft Tank. Vessels over 200 feet long were called ships. Vessels less than 200 feet long were called craft. LSTs, LCTs, and LCIs were invented by the British and were capable of landing troops right on the beach. They also invented the Higgins boat. Since Germany controlled French ports, the British knew that they would only be able to invade Europe by landing on the beach. This is a picture of an LCI. The acronym stands for Landing Craft Infantry. LCIs only carried soldiers. They had a crew of 24 to 60 sailors and could carry 200 troops. LCIs did the dirty work of amphibious landings. They laid down smoke to hide larger vessels and supported the troops who were landing by trading fire with the enemy shore batteries. The LCIs had rockets, mortars, machine guns, and 4 20mm guns. Later, some LCIs were converted to gunboats with 40mm guns, 20mm guns, 50 caliber machine guns, rockets, and mortars. These LCIs had larger naval crews, but did not transport troops. LCIs were only 158 feet long, had flat bottoms and shallow draft for landing on the beach. This also made them unstable on the ocean. The crew was seasick a lot. Originally, these ships were not meant to be ocean-going. The plan was to transport them in large pieces in larger ships and assemble them in their theater of operations. World War II, however, necessitated that they be sailed directly from their shipyards across both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Due to the close-in support these ships provided to invasion forces, the crews of these ships sustained enormous casualties. LCIs were extremely important to the success of invasions in both Europe and throughout the Pacific. If you would like to learn more about these ships, check out the website of the USS Landing Craft Infantry National Association, which is where I got this information from. Okay, now back to the invasion of Sicily. Here's our map again. You can see the path that the LCIs took before heading for Sicily. The invasion force was huge and consisted of approximately 3,000 ships, 150,000 ground troops, and over 4,000 aircraft. Depending on the source you read, the invasion was either larger or equal in size to the invasion of Normandy. Fortunately, the British were apparently able to trick Hitler into thinking that the Allies would invade Sardinia and Greece, so Hitler moved many of his forces to those islands. Consequently, the Allies were met by only 2 divisions of Axis troops instead of the 6 that were feared. The British ruse was called Operation Mincemeat. In the interest of time, I won't discuss it in this video. You can learn more about this fascinating story by reading about Operation Mincemeat in your library or on the internet. On the morning of July 10th, at daybreak, they landed on the beach in Licata. The large guns of the Allied battleships and bombs from Allied planes were pounding the enemy positions on shore. George Griffinhagen, a PFC in the 20th, was interviewed by the World War II Museum. Mr. Griffinhagen said that there was no resistance on the ground to their invasion, at least at Licata, where they landed. According to Chappie's diary, there had been ground forces there, but they left in a hurry, leaving a lot of personal items and weapons behind. The Luftwaffe was very active, though. In the afternoon, Messerschmitts would fly in low, just above the treetops to avoid detection, then swoop down from above the cliffs on the beach to try to bomb ships. Then, on the way home, they'd strafe the troops on land. They flew low enough that the troops on the ground could actually see the faces of the pilots. Fortunately, the Navy anti-aircraft gunners were very good and shot down quite a few. However, some ships were hit, and shrapnel from the Navy guns and bombs raining down caused quite a few casualties to the Allied landing force as well. There was fierce fighting on the ground elsewhere, though. For example, this is a monument to the men of the 82nd Airborne Division who were killed in action at Ponte di Rillo. The inscription says, quote, "This site, the night of July 10, 1943, was witness to bloody combat between the 82nd Airborne Division and Italian and German troops. Extreme were the losses, supreme was the heroism, and from the sacrifice of these men is created a new history of Europe." The monument lists the names of 39 soldiers. The night of July 11th brought disaster. In the afternoon, some but not all American forces were told to hold their anti-aircraft fire after dark because American C-47 transports would be flying over to make a crucial paratrooper drop further inland to support the drive through Sicily. This is a picture of young paratroopers in a C-47 headed over to Sicily. They thought this was going to be a piece of cake. They were going to be landing in Allied-controlled territory, no problems. In the evening, planes did start flying over, but they were German bombers. Once they started dropping flares and bombs, the American anti-aircraft guns started firing. Unfortunately, the American transports also started flying in right after the enemy bombing raid. The result was that of 144 American planes, 23 were destroyed and 37 others badly damaged. In the morning, the magnitude of the disaster was known. We had killed 220 of our own men. Eisenhower was furious at Patton for the lack of communication with the American ground forces. Patton wrote in his diary that he thought he'd be fired. The History.net website includes the summary of the investigation into this disaster. It was considered a systemic failure. Some of the reasons were it was nighttime, some radios were damaged during the invasion, so ground forces didn't know paratroopers would fly in at that time. Navy gunners couldn't identify the Allied planes fast enough. The safe corridor established for the Allied planes was only 2 miles wide, and some pilots flew out of the corridor to avoid artillery. And lastly, just the unfortunate coincidence of paratroopers flying in during a German bombing raid. Two of the corrective actions from this incident were that in the future, safe corridors for Allied planes would be 10 miles wide, and wide black stripes would be painted on the wings of planes involved in invasions to make Allied planes easier to identify. These became known as invasion stripes and were later used on the aircraft participating in the invasion of Normandy. Here are some planes with their invasion stripes, and one of them is a P-51 just getting its stripes prior to the invasion of Normandy. War is chaotic. You can do your best to plan an invasion, but there are some factors that you just can't control or anticipate, and one of them is the actions of the enemy. You can find out more about the investigation into this incident and the corrective actions on the history.net website. On July 12th, the 20th 1st Battalion moved by truck to the extreme eastern flank of the 3rd Infantry Division and took up defensive positions, then continued the attack with the division a few days later. Patton's plan was to cut the island in half to try to trap the Germans on the west side of the island. General Alexander, a British general, was in charge of all land forces in the invasion of Sicily. On July 17th, Patton had asked General Alexander for permission to take Palermo, and General Alexander agreed. As Patton was driving north, his tanks ran into a minefield. He called the 20th Engineers to remove the minefield so that he could drive forward again. This is where some of the men saw Patton in person for the first time. He was standing up in a jeep with his pearl-handled revolvers, screaming and cursing. When the 20th got there, he screamed at them, "Get their GD trucks out of the way." It took a few minutes to explain to one of his aides that they were the 20th Engineers they had called for to remove the mines. Did he want the mines removed or not? This is a picture of Patton with his pearl-handled revolvers standing in a jeep in Palermo, Sicily. You might be wondering what kind of reception the Allied soldiers were getting from the citizens of Sicily. By this time, Mussolini was very unpopular. He was a fascist dictator who came to power in 1922. He created a police state and embroiled Italy in all sorts of foreign conflicts throughout the 1930s. He had dreams of creating an Italian empire throughout Europe and the Mediterranean. He opportunistically allied Italy with Hitler, thinking that Germany would win the war and Italy would share in the spoils. That was a huge miscalculation. He sent Italian troops to help the Germans fight Russia on the Eastern Front. Italy sustained heavy losses. This was very unpopular with Italians who questioned why they were fighting a war with Russia. It wasn't their war. Fast forward to 1943, and now Italy is being bombed by the Allies. Food and fuel are scarce, and prices are skyrocketing. Even Rome was being bombed. It was apparent that Italy was going to lose the war. The Italian public was fed up with Mussolini in the war. Mussolini was ousted on July 25, 1943, and thrown into prison. Although peace talks with the Allies started immediately, it wouldn't be until October 13, 1943, before Italy officially switched sides. Consequently, the Allied troops were mostly being welcomed with open arms in Sicily. Here you see a Sicilian citizen enjoying a glass of wine with some American GIs. George Griffenhagen of the 20th said that two English phrases that the local citizens seemed to all know was "Mussolini, a son of a bitch," and "I got a brother in a Brooklyn." Sicily must have been a beautiful place to see, except for the war, of course. So I'm showing you pictures now of a town called Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily. And you'll know why in a minute, because we're going to tell you a little story. George Griffenhagen said that one day a major from the 82nd Airborne Division took George and 3 other guys to a town called Castellammare del Golfo to take control of it. All 4 of them. The Italians were expecting them and were happy to see them. The major introduced them to the chief of the Carabinieri, the chief of police, and then left. Later, another policeman came and took the 4 men to fascist headquarters, where they broke in and found the best stock bar George had ever seen in his life. The men proceeded to help themselves, and 3 of them got really drunk. Fortunately, George didn't get too drunk because later that night another policeman came and took George to a building. There he was introduced to a high-ranking Italian officer. It turned out that the officer was the commander of the Italian garrison outside the city and wanted to surrender. George, a PFC, said that he thought it was best for the Italian officer to wait until morning when he would find an officer for him to surrender to. Then they had a drink, and George returned to his friends at the fascist headquarters. In the morning, he did contact Captain Cregan, who came to take the Italian officer's surrender. The entire interview with George with the World War II Museum is online and covers his entire experience in all of World War II. It's a really interesting interview. The World War II Museum interviewed many World War II veterans, but I only found 2 from the 1340th or the 20th. One was George Griffenhagen, and another one was a man named Joseph Alter, who was a young lieutenant with the 1340th later in Europe. There were also a number of not friendly people that Chappie came in contact with. They're described in his diary. Apparently Mussolini did still have a few fans. There used to be a saying in Italy, "Say what you want about Mussolini, but at least the trains run on time." On July 17th, the 2nd Battalion was attached to the 82nd Airborne Division for the attack into Palermo. On July 23rd, General Alexander, realizing that the 8th Army was not strong enough to take Messina, and with the 7th Army already in position, ordered Patton to attack east on Montgomery's left. Assigned highways 113 and 120, Patton had room for just 2 corps. If you look at this map again, you'll see what he was talking about. Highway 120, you'll see Nicosia on there. The next pictures show what that road was like. Not exactly the New Jersey Turnpike. The Coast Highway, Highway 113, ran along a narrow belt between the ridge noses and the beach, and was assigned to the 20th Engineers for improvement. They used captured rollers, portable rock crushers, and stockpiles of crushed stone and asphalt to maintain the roads, build culverts, and repair railway bridges, resulting in the improvement of 18 bypasses between Palermo and Cape Orlando. You can't see it on the map here, but Cape Orlando and Brolo are both just west of Messina, about 25 miles west on that Highway 113 up there on the north coast. It's where those 2 arrows are. George Griffenhagen guessed there might have been at least 100 bridges on the road, Highway 113, between Palermo and Messina. The German army had blown all of them up. According to Chappie's diary, at this time, the 20th is also still removing thousands of mines. This is a picture of General Patton on his way to Messina. This is up on Highway 113 in Brolo, Sicily, which was near Cape Orlando. On July 24th, elements of the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment moved into Palermo to open the port. A great amount of work had to be done in cleaning up the harbor area and the piers, opening road exits, and bridging over wrecked vessels, so as to secure more berthing spaces. Although Palermo was solidly in Allied hands on July 24th, on July 26th, Patton made his official grand entrance into Palermo with his tanks and pearl-handled revolvers, accompanied by newsmen and cameramen to capture the moment. You would think that there would be a lot of pictures of Patton coming into Palermo, but I could only find the one of the tanks and him standing up in the back of his Jeep. I assume he came in this modified scout car that you see here. Chappie said amused GIs watched the show from the sidewalk. Although this seemed to be a big ego trip for Patton, and it probably was, it was also important for Congress and the folks back home to be able to share in Allied victories. It was good for their morale to know that their sons were being led by strong, capable generals. It's difficult to conduct a war without the support of Congress and the people, and the Allied generals were very aware of that. Publicizing this event was also probably a big screw you to Mussolini and Hitler. This is another picture I found. Field Marshal Montgomery and General Patton enjoying their victory in Palermo, July 1943. These generals were all very competitive and just loved to stick it to each other, but apparently they also knew when to set aside their differences and enjoy their victories together. When the war in Sicily was over, Montgomery threw a big victory party in Catania, Sicily. These next two pictures are my dad's pictures. I'm guessing they were taken in Tunisia or Sicily based on the damage and the apparently warm, sunny weather. I don't think they experienced much warm weather in Europe. Palermo had been heavily bombed, first by the Allies and then after the Allies moved in, the Luftwaffe. The Allies bombed it heavily because it was a base for the Italian Navy, and the port was used to send supplies to the Italians and Germans in North Africa. There was a lot of damage in Palermo. These next pictures were taken by Horst Grund in Palermo. In 1937, he was drafted into the military. At the start of the European War, he was attached to the German Navy as a combat photographer. In April 1943, he was wounded and spent some time in a hospital in Germany, returning to work in Italy in August 1943. In January 1944 in Berlin, he was wounded again. He continued to work in the photography and moving pictures field after the war. He passed away in 2001. This is a picture of him in Agrigento, Sicily in 1943. This is another picture taken by Horst Grund of war refugees in Palermo in 1943. Kind of looks like the driver of the ox cart might be cussing him out. He's probably not very happy being stuck in the middle of a war. On July 28th, the first supply ships, 6 coasters from North Africa, entered the harbor. By this time, the engineers could operate the port at only some 30% of its full capacity because of the still uncleared wreckage of 44 enemy vessels that had been sunk alongside the seawall and in the channel. Palermo's operating capacity was raised to 60% by August 29th. During the period from July 28th to August 31st, the port received 48 ships. During this same period, 120,706 deadweight tons of supplies were discharged at the port. This is the port of Palermo today. If you look at pictures of Palermo online, it looks like a beautiful city. The 20th Engineers began repairing the rail line between Palermo and Santo Stefano on 30th of July. They rebuilt 4 bridges, opened a tunnel, and replaced a considerable amount of track. The line opened on August 9th. This is a picture of the work. This picture is from Chappie's book, and this is up on Highway 113, the north coast of Sicily, the road that runs between Palermo and Messina. Famous World War II combat reporter Ernie Pyle wrote, "During the latter days of the Sicilian campaign, I spent all my time with the combat engineers who were in it up to their ears. Scores of times during the Sicilian fighting, I heard the expression voiced by everybody that this is certainly an engineer's war. And indeed it was. Every foot of our advance upon the gradually withdrawing enemy was tempered by the speed with which our engineers could open the highways, clear the mines, and bypass the blown bridges." This picture and the next picture my dad brought home from the war, and here are the guys taking a little time out from the work to horse around a little bit and pose for pictures. This next picture is also one of my dad's pictures. I think it's the 20th camp in Palermo. You can see the 20th banner, so it's before England and Europe. And the scenery is very similar to the next picture, which is one of Chappie's pictures of the camp in Palermo. Keep in mind that the 20th has approximately 1,000 men in 6 different companies of about 150 each. Each company can work independently and are deployed all over Sicily, so obviously they aren't all in one camp. Although the war in Sicily may be close to ending, there are still German bombing raids. There's a large one on Palermo on August 1st. Chappie wrote that quite a few ships, some loaded with ammunition, were hit, and one of the 20th's own gun crews on the wharf were all killed when their position took a direct hit. The raid lasted over 2 hours. One destroyer, the Mayrant, was badly damaged with a number of casualties. Chappie went to visit the ship to retrieve the bodies for burial on shore. While on board, he met with Franklin Roosevelt Jr., who was an officer on the ship. According to DestroyerHistory.org, while on anti-aircraft patrol off Palermo on July 26, she was attacked by Luftwaffe dive bombers. A near miss only a yard or two off her port bow during this encounter caused extensive damage. Her side ruptured and her engineering space flooded. She was towed into Palermo with 5 dead and 18 wounded. In spite of her damage, the destroyer's guns helped repel several Luftwaffe raids on Palermo the next week. On August 16th, the United States Third Army entered Messina. On August 17th, the war in Sicily was officially over, but the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment would work in Sicily until early November. Although the Allies were able to race through Sicily in only 39 days, the German army had succeeded in slowing down the Allies' advance long enough to evacuate most of their forces to the mainland of Italy by crossing the 2-mile-wide Strait of Messina over the course of 2 nights beginning August 12th. You can see the narrow Strait of Messina in the upper right-hand corner of this map. There was some regret that there were no plans to intercept the possible evacuation of the German and Italian armies. These same troops would be faced again during the invasion of the Italian mainland. You can find out more about this seeming strategic error by going to the U.S. Army Center of Military History website. Total casualties from the campaign for the U.S. Army were 2,237 killed in action or missing, 5,946 wounded, and 598 captured. For the British troops, the figures were 2,062 killed in action or missing, 7,137 wounded, and 2,644 captured. So you can see that the war in Sicily was no walk in the park. Also, keep in mind that I'm only telling the story of the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment. Other units like the Infantry, Rangers, Armored Divisions, and Paratroopers saw intense combat in Sicily. You can find the entire account and analysis of the invasion of Sicily on the U.S. Army Center of Military History website. This is a picture of the Sicily-Rome American Cemetery. It's located in Nettuno, Italy, 38 miles south of Rome. There are 7,900 American servicemen and civilians buried here. The war in Sicily may be over, but not the work of the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment. They scattered all over northern Sicily, restoring ports, disarming mines, and rebuilding roads and bridges. There were approximately 1,000 men in a regiment, so they were not all deployed in one place. The regiment could be disarming mines, rebuilding airfields, bridges, railroads, and roads, all at the same time, so they were distributed over a large area. Sicily would be very important for the invasion of mainland Italy. It was a staging area for supplies and soldiers and had many airfields. At this time, the 20th is getting prepared to invade the Italian mainland. They have their gas masks and maps, and they're ready to go. On September 3rd, the men are relieved to learn that they will not be part of the invasion of Italy. Apparently, at the last minute, it was decided that the 20th would be needed for the invasion of Normandy, but the men didn't know that yet. On October 2nd, they hear the rumor that they're headed for England with General Patton to prepare for another invasion. During the last week of October, the 2nd Battalion was building an airfield in Trapani, far western Sicily. That's probably what my dad was doing when he sent these cards home to his mom and dad. Unfortunately, what they had endured in North Africa and Sicily would only be a preview of what they would experience in the final battle for Europe. Chappie's daughter, Ann Elin, sent me a picture of the badge of the 20th Combat Engineers. It has the 20th Combat Engineers motto in Latin. Translated, it means build and fight, and they're certainly going to be doing both of those. On November 11, 1943, the 20th Combat Regiment boarded a troopship in Palermo, the USAT Sloterdijk. This is a picture of it. It was the Dutch ship leased by the army. They were headed for Great Britain. The captain waited a couple extra days to leave because he was trying to get more machine guns for the ship. On the way to Palermo, they had lost 2 ships to German dive bombers. It was a large convoy, 5 fully loaded troop ships and numerous naval ships for protection. It wasn't just the 20th Engineers, it was also the 82nd Airborne Division, among others. Approximately 10,000 men in total. The convoy sailed down along the North African coast past Bizerte. As it passes Oran, it's joined by another convoy from Oran carrying the American 7th Army. They could see the mountains of North Africa and remember the friends they left behind. At night they could see the lights of Oran, and later as they passed through the Straits of Gibraltar, the lights of Tangiers. U-boats were always a worry, so the Navy dropped depth charges all night as they went through the straits. As you can see from the map, the convoy went far out into the Atlantic in the hopes of avoiding detection by the enemy. Who knows whether it worked or not? All we know is that the convoys weren't attacked. On November 19th, the captain announced that they were halfway between England and America. Some of the men went topside to sea and waited for the ship to turn north, hoping that instead it would continue to head for America. Of course, that didn't happen. While on the ship, the men played cards, did calisthenics, attended training courses on subjects like building Bailey bridges, writing letters, and listening to performances by some of the men who were musicians. The Bailey Bridge was a British invention that allowed the engineers to build an 80-foot, 21-ton bridge in only 2.5 hours. The bridge was invented by British engineer Sir Donald Coleman Bailey and was invaluable to the Allies in World War II. On November 21st, they had a Thanksgiving feast on the ship. Chappie said it was really good. On November 27th, the ship finally docked in the port of Greenock, Scotland, not far from Glasgow. The troops were transported to the rail station where the British Red Cross supplied them with coffee, donuts, and cigarettes. Then they boarded a train. The train traveled all night to reach Devizes, Wiltshire, England, where their camp was located. The weather was cold and damp. Here's a map again showing their travels in England. When they got to Devizes, they stayed in a barracks. The barracks they stayed in was called the Prince Maurice Barracks, and unfortunately it was torn down in 1987 and I couldn't find any pictures of it. There's also another barracks that some of the men stayed in called the Le Marchant Barracks, and you can see some pictures of that on the internet, but I couldn't find any good ones that I could blow up for this presentation. My dad told my mom that this was the first time he got to sleep in a bed in a year since he left the States. What a treat! Devizes is a very old town dating back to Roman times and has always been a military town, which is why there are barracks there. From Devizes, the regiment moved to the Carclew estate near Truro in Cornwall County. Here, the regiment was very busy building camps and hospitals for troops undergoing maneuvers in preparation for the invasion of France. In his diary, Chappie states that the men were constructing tents, Nissen huts, running supply depots, hauling materials, building landing hards in Falmouth, assisting troops in amphibious exercises, and acting as MPs. All this 7 days a week. On January 21st, 1944, the official order came down reorganizing the 20th Engineer Combat Regiment. The 1st Battalion would retain the title of the 20th. Now it would be called the 20th Engineer Combat Battalion. The 2nd Battalion would now be called the 1340th Engineer Combat Battalion. Both battalions would be attached to the 1171st Engineer Combat Group, which was in turn attached to V Corps of the 1st Army. The 1171st would again be commanded by Colonel Daly. Major J.E. Sonnefield will be commander of the 20th, and Major Truman Setliff would be commander of the 1340th. This picture was taken in August 1944 in France. In the center is now Lieutenant Colonel Truman Setliff. On his left is Major Bruce Renfro, the operations officer, and on his right is Major John Auld, the executive officer. The 20th and 1340th could act as separate organizations under the administrative umbrella of the 1171st, but in reality they were never really located very far apart. Also, the companies of these engineering units were quite capable of operating independently when needed. Chaplain Carpenter would remain the chaplain of both units as chaplain of the 1171st. On February 7th, the 1171st moved to Wiveliscombe in Somerset County, as you can see on the map. Here they were billeted in Nissen huts, only 5 minutes from the pubs and 45 minutes from the larger town of Taunton, Somerset. As then Lieutenant Colonel Sutcliffe later wrote in the history of the 1340th, training for the Battle of Europe began in earnest. Training in the constructing of Bailey bridges, treadway bridges, and pontoon bridges, mine removal, assault tactics, radio operation, bomb disposal, first aid, water purification, chemical warfare, and surveying. Physical conditioning included hikes, calisthenics, athletics, and close order drills. They were all crammed into the spring months of 1944. The British in the years earlier had anticipated that Germany might try to invade England. To prepare for that, mines had been planted on English beaches. Now the mines were no longer needed. Unfortunately, the mines had been deteriorating due to being exposed to the salty sand. One day, some of the engineers were helping the British to remove mines when one exploded, killing a lieutenant and an enlisted man. Disarming mines is dangerous business. Up to this point, most of the 20th casualties have been caused by mines. Even to this day, when there are storms, land mines and sometimes large sea mines are found on British beaches. By now, the seawater has probably corroded them and rendered them inactive, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Always call the police and stay away from mines. Boxing has a long history in the military, going back as far as I could tell to the Civil War at least. And it's a good way to relieve the tension of war, and it can be done in a relatively small area. So it's popular on ships and anywhere else that you can set up a boxing ring. In March, General Giroux, commanding officer of V Corps, expressed an interest in forming a V Corps boxing team and hosting a competition for all the units in England. Chaplain Carpenter, having been trained as a boxer and having formed a boxing team back at Camp Pickett, Virginia, said he'd like to help coach the team. Back at Camp Pickett, he had found some excellent fighters. One was Private Bill Bannock of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, who was ranked third in his class of professionals back home and an AAU finalist. Another was Private Edward Gagatus, the son of a Pennsylvania coal miner. He weighed only 115 pounds, but came out fighting like a bantam rooster, small but combative. The guys nicknamed him Chicken. I think it would have been more accurate to nickname him Rooster. The team won the camp championship back at Camp Pickett. I found all these pictures of boxing in World War II, but unfortunately I couldn't find any pictures of Chappie's team, so you'll just have to use your imagination, I guess. Fast forward to 1944. Chappie's putting together another boxing team. He's in luck. In addition to Bannock and Gagatus, he also finds a boxer named Elmo Barnes in the 1171st. Elmo is from Detroit, a 2 times Golden Gloves winner, and ranked third in the United States in his weight division. Chappie's team will be fighting the best fighters from the other military branches in the European Theater of Operations, ETOP as it's called. The championship fights were held in Bristol. All the top brass, including General Eisenhower, were in attendance. To make a long story short, the 1171st boxing team won the first Army ETOP Championship trophy with 8 undefeated fighters in the finals. You may be wondering why I'm spending so much time on boxing. I used it the way the military used it, as a temporary diversion from reality. Yes, boxing is fun for the men to watch for a brief time, but when the matches end, the reality is that they're still in a war, and they don't know if they'll ever go home. At least 4 of the men on Chappie's team, including Private Edward Gagatus, would be killed in action in the Battle of Huertgen Forest in Germany. I hope the other young men in these pictures made it home. Now we'll see more of my dad's pictures. I'm sorry, but I really don't know the names of any of these men. I wish I did. Maybe some of you out there do. I believe these pictures were taken during the 20th and 1340th stay in England. It's probably one of the few times during the war that the guys got some time to relax a little and go out to the pubs. The buildings in the background remind me of the types of buildings you might find in these very old English towns. I hope someone out there recognized them as their father, brother, grandfather, or uncle. The next picture, I believe, was also taken during this time. Both Chappie's daughter, Anne Eland, and I agree. First of all, it looks like a class picture, so it's probably taken during training. Second, the picture includes the 1340th banner, so we definitely know that it's after the 20th reorganization. When I was a kid, I sometimes looked at his pictures from the war. My dad usually didn't say anything about them, but he sat there with me. One day I was looking at this picture, I'm guessing I was 10 or 11. I decided to ask my dad a question. I had a feeling it was a touchy subject, but I asked anyway. I said, "Dad, did any of these guys get killed in the war?" Silence. Finally, I looked up at my dad's face to see if he was listening. He just stared at the picture with a blank look on his face. Then he started pointing. No words, just pointing. He pointed to about 4 or 5 guys in the picture. I never asked my dad another question about the war, and he never talked about it either. My dad died at the relatively young age of 53 from complications of severe rheumatoid arthritis. Whatever his memories were, he took them with him when he left. I've noticed that many veterans don't really talk about their experiences until they're in their 70s or 80s. Apparently, it takes that long to dull the emotional pain of what they experienced. On May 17th, it's time to travel to the marshalling area in southern Cornwall. The locals call it Land's End. It was cold and foggy all the time. There was a sea of tents everywhere. Special services provided movies, books, magazines, candy, and cigarettes. Equipment was being distributed, and morale was high. Chaplains traveled to the camps to conduct services. The 1171st Combat Group is attached to V Corps, and you can see their area down there by Weymouth and Portland. This is a picture I found online of a few guys from the 80th Infantry Division relaxing a little bit in one of the marshalling areas. It's now May 23rd. The camps have moved to areas nearer their embarkation sites, Bournemouth, Plymouth, and Falmouth. All camps are now completely sealed and everyone is forbidden to leave. No communication is allowed with anyone outside the camps. Operation Overlord has now entered the invasion phase. General Omar Bradley will be commanding the American forces. May 30th, the Luftwaffe flew over and bombed an oil storage tanker or ship in Falmouth. Hopefully they hadn't spotted all the landing craft assembled there, but it's hard to believe they missed it. It's now June 2nd, and American soldiers are boarding their landing ships. Some LSTs are out in the harbor, so men are brought out to the ships on Navy barges. The ships are packed with tanks, trucks, jeeps, and tons of other equipment, in addition to troops. The troops are ready, morale is high, and it's now or never. They were scheduled to sail on June 4th at 5:30 a.m., but unfortunately the wind kicked up in the channel, preventing them from sailing. On June 5th, they sail. The invasion of Normandy has begun. You know, when I look at these young guys and their smiling faces, I am so glad they didn't know what was waiting for them on the other side of the English Channel. I hope you found this video useful in better understanding what your relatives may have experienced in World War II, and maybe you even saw their picture. Part 3 of this video will begin with the invasion of Normandy.
She lays awake in a silent room, holding his picture washed silver by the moon. Oceans away, he feels her sigh. So alone in the world tonight. Freedom needs a soldier, that nameless, faceless one, a young girl's lover, a baby's father, some mother's son. Too young to know his daddy's gone. He hears them say his mother must be strong. So he pretends like children do. He likes to stand in his daddy's shoes. Freedom needs a soldier, a nameless, faceless one, a young girl's lover, a baby's father, some mother's son. Your freedom needs a soldier until the battle's won. A young girl's lover, a baby's father, some mother's son. She closes her eyes and sees him at 3. In her mind, that's the age he'll always be. And only God understands her love. Now she prays